Hello, welcome back to I Got Board Game.
Got board
I
game.
Got Board
Woo!
Game. I am Ben,
I'm John.
and in this video, this is our detailed review video for a game that we did a summary review video for just now, but this will go into our detailed pros and cons of it, and that game is
Napoleonic Duke of Wellington.
there you go. You said the thing I was gonna say. The Duke, not
Duke.
related to what John just said.
Napoleon or the French in any way, shape, or form.
The Duke by Catalyst Game Lab came out in 2013, is a two-player abstract chess-like game. And so if you wanted a better idea of the general gameplay, you can check out our summary review video, which should have gone up just before this. But just for now, I will really quickly summarize that the Duke, being a two-player only chess-like game, is a game where you're going to be moving pieces according to their movement written on the pieces on this checkerboard, trying to capture the opponent's Duke. And so that's how you win the game. And so you're either going to be moving pieces according to their own movements and then flipping them to have new movements in the future, and then moving and flipping, or you're going to randomly grab new pieces from your bag to add to the board to get new troops to help you accomplish your goal. Capturing the opponent's Duke is how you win, and that's how the game is played. And so with that said, we will go now into our pros and cons for the game that led to our rating in our summary video. But getting into the pros, we will start with John.
So getting into the pros of this game, I think this is a great reimagination of classic two-player strategy games. So if you think of games like chess, checkers, Go, backgammon, so on and so forth, they're usually games that are set up with a very structured approach of having an equal amount of pieces, or the way that you place pieces is exactly the same, right? So chess, everyone has the same pieces. Checkers, everyone has the same pieces. Go, you're just placing pieces one at a time. The two players are balanced in that way. The cool thing about this game is when you're playing through the game, you start off with a balanced board of your Duke and your two basic pieces, but as you progress through the game and as you're adding new pieces to play and to use on the board, you're drawing from a bag randomly and blindly to reinforce your space. And the cool thing about it is that there's a lot of different unique pieces that are within this bag, and you don't know which one you're getting. So when you're reinforcing, you could be coming up with a certain piece where you're like, oh, what am I supposed to do with this piece? Because it has maybe this funky movement that kind of doesn't really fit your current strategy, or you're kind of like, oh my gosh, this is the perfect piece. I drew something that, can attack from range, like the archers or something like that. And it gives you kind of a new way of approaching it. And every time you're drawing new pieces out, it changes how you're thinking and how you're approaching it. And it's not something that you can easily strategize for, or you can just kind of, you're kind of left up to what you draw. And I think that's a really cool way of taking these two-player games and adding in kind of this different spice to it, where it's not just, oh, I have the same pieces every time I start this game, and it's exactly the same way like chess. Always have the same setup every time you start the game, which strategically you can plan for it. And that's why you have all these grandmasters and you have all this stuff with chess strategy books and all that stuff. But this game, you can kind of, as you're playing the game, every time you play the game with somebody, it's fresh and it's a little different when you go through the game.
Yeah, I agree. Like that bit of chance that it adds into this kind of chess-like formula, I think it's what makes the game more welcoming and easy to pick up for people. So it's not so daunting as chess with all the pieces, and then knowing that there's the meta for the game or the strategies. And I think what also I really like that makes the game welcoming is, even though it doesn't use the chess pieces that people might have learned how they move, like all the pieces have their movement on the piece itself, right? The front and the back, right? And so I think both, like, this is probably the thing that makes it seem most clever to me, that all the pieces have their movements. They're different from regular chess movements overall, And they also have two different sides of movements that are, again, just printed on it. So you always just know how pieces can move. That just makes it easy to learn. But then especially with the flipping then being another part that I think is clever, that also kind of goes into what keeps the game something that you need to strategize in, right? It's not just always seeing the same movement. It's like, okay, this piece is always going to go like this or, left or stuff like that. But you always have to flip a piece after you move it. So then it's going to change. And so you can either plan for that or kind of hope for the best. Ideally, you would plan for it because you can actually look at the bottom side of your own pieces, but your opponent can't. So that can actually be what surprises them of like, oh, this piece isn't going to be able to reach me or bother me. And then you move it and flip it. And it's like, oh, shoot, suddenly its new moves means it's a threat now. Right? I think that's very clever.
Yeah, and I think that mechanic of transitioning your pieces every single time you're moving is a very unique thing to this game. I can't think of any other games where when you're utilizing a piece, it constantly is in transition of what it can do or what it's able to do. And I think that's actually something that's very special to this game. And is also one of the cool things of how it kind of balances this game as well, where you might imagine that if I'm drawing these pieces randomly, what if somebody just draws a piece that seems extremely powerful or extremely strong, right? In its initial movement when they first place it, you might think, oh, well, how balanced is this game? Because it just seems like they're just going to destroy me because they got this certain piece out. But I think that's what the fun part about this game. And I think the thought they put into it when they created these pieces is typically really strong pieces with really great movement on the reverse side likely have some form of a negative to them or some kind of a consequence where they have a really strong purpose, but it would probably put that piece in jeopardy or put that piece in some kind of maybe kind of this one-time use, which makes it very effective, but it also is something that you have to think about where it's, you only have a certain amount of tiles that are in your deck or in your bag that you have to play from. So, and you may only have one of those in your entire kind of play bag. So one or two, and you don't know if you're going to get a second one as you keep playing through the game. So you have to be very strategic about how you're thinking about it. And it's also from a strategic standpoint, as we were saying, is there's a new element of strategically thinking where it's not, oh, I just know exactly how this moves. It's, oh, I have to think 2 or 3 steps ahead of if I move it this way and then it flips, then it can only do certain movements. And then if it does that, then it goes back to the first movement that it had. And that makes it kind of interesting because then you have to like think, okay, if I put it in this position, am I helping myself or maybe am I putting myself in actually a worse position by trying to do that? And that's where you kind of get that foresight that you get in some other games like chess and stuff in this game with arguably a lot less pieces on the board at any given time.
And for me, the other big con, because what I just mentioned with the whole flipping and the writing the movement on the piece, that's probably like my biggest two pros for the game. And then another pretty big one though is the production, just showing some more pieces now. And I think this was quite a big deal when I first came across a game like this, and it still kind of stands out to me now, even after getting into board games so much, that a company would print on big, thick wooden pieces and print on them in such detail, like so much detail, and still sell the game for not that much. I believe the game was maybe around $40 when I got it, which maybe even 35, but which isn't much for something that comes with so many wooden tiles, right? The same sets for both players. And these feel great and they move great on the board, right? That's just like a flat board, flat pieces, but having the writing on them and they just feel chunky and smooth. And so this was actually, this part of the production is actually what pushed me to raise my rating of it from a 6 to a 6.5, which is what I ultimately gave it. Just that 0.5 more because there's such nice quality to the components. And so I don't know if you had any other pro, John.
Yeah, I'd say one other pro. I think the other cool thing about movement in the game, we talked about the flipping of it. I think it's also cool that the game has a number of different things that the pieces do. That is also very kind of reminiscent of if you had an army, or if you had pieces that had different ways of doing things, that they're pretty unique and they're pretty different. So some pieces, it's just direct movement. They can move certain amounts of spaces. Some of them can attack from range, so they can attack things that are far away from them. Some of them kind of move across the board really fast. So if you're thinking like in an army thought process, like cavalry that are like moving around the board, or like flanking army pieces, it kind of captures some of that imagery in the piece movement of, since you're on this gridlocked, this gridlocked board, kind of getting that sense of the movement of pieces, the positioning of pieces, or even sometimes they have the skills to utilize a different piece to move, but rather than flipping that piece for the movement, you flip the piece that's commanding that, right? So then you can kind of re-strategize how the flipping of your movement works by utilizing a different piece to have them move for you. And then you can kind of think about your strategies in a different way. So I think just adding those extra complexities where it's not just like basic movement of I move forward and backward and all pieces just have the same just forward and backward movement is also a pretty nice thing to do.
Yeah, you mentioned there's like that, the command action of like moving a piece to another command spot, and then I remember there's like the strike action where the piece just attacks a space but doesn't move themselves, but then they need to still flip. Those are nice new little touches on top of like what we're used to in chess. And I would say for me, just a final point on like a really small possible pro, for me it's actually more of a neutral point, but it could be a pro for you guys, is that at least I know in the Duke, and when I look through the rules again, there are other modes of play, because there are some other tiles that can add terrain to the board, or I think even flags for a kind of capture the flag style of play that you're doing. So if those interest you, I think that could be a small pro that those exist. For me, it's neutral because I haven't tried them, and I think you still have to like the base system, right, of how the pieces move to actually like those additional modes and pieces. And so so I just wanted to mention that. But then going on to our cons, starting with John.
So I'll say I actually listed it as a pro, but I do think one of the cons that can come out of this game is the randomization as you're playing through the game. So it is a little frustrating if you're going to play this game where strategically you kind of have to gamble and just hope for the best of pieces that you're adding into the board. And sometimes you can be put, or you can draw cards or draw tiles or draw these pieces that are not useful, not relevant to your situation. And that is a little bit frustrating because it is taking an aspect of your turn, and as a part of the rules of adding on new reinforcements, it is positioned around your Duke piece, which is your primary piece. And so if you're pulling out a piece that limits your movement, and we were talking about it as we were preparing for this review, is we remember situations we were playing where we drew pieces and we have to place it next to your Duke. And by placing it next to your Duke, you actually completely constrict their movement, which actually leads to the potential of you being put into checkmate, for lack of a better word, or basically put in a position where you're going to lose the game, which is a little bit frustrating, but you may not have any other better options. So that is a little bit of a frustrating point, because it's like you can't really plan for that, and you may just be poor luck of the draw the entire game, which, I mean, but that's like, I say it as kind of the side con because it is the nature of every randomization in any game. That's the same thing that happens.
So for me, the biggest con, and I mentioned, John kind of guessed this between us recording these videos, is that it's an abstract game, that it's basically a themeless game. As much as we want to talk about the Duke or the Kings or kingdoms going at each other and such, like John was even pointing out, like you could literally just like have like the movements on a tile without any like little picture, without any name, and it'll function the same way, right? You can name it anything and it can still move this way. You don't necessarily feel like you're playing like this kingdom versus kingdom.
Mhm.
You feel it as much as you would, I guess, in chess, right? Where like some people will be like, oh, there is a story behind chess, but I don't think anyone's thinking about the story or theme of it when they're playing like, this gallant knight moving this way and
Moving
striking
in
at
an L shape.
striking at the bishop or something, it's like, no, it's an abstract game. And for me, like that means a lot because like I do care about theme. And even though I say the production is nice, like the art there's no art. It's this, right? This is functional. It's very helpful and functional, but not like nice looking art, right? So none of it's lacking all that kind of theme that would pull me into a game, and really relying on its mechanics. And so then that would kind of get into my second con, which is not as big as the whole being abstract and no theme, but it is related in that I really like two-player games. And I mentioned before that like the idea of two-player games and how creative they can be, and when designing those, I think really appeals to me. But this kind of just feels a little too much like those older abstract games like chess and checkers, where then like I would say if you're coming from those and then getting into kind of modern board games, this is a good step to see just like a small jump to something different in what board games can do. But having been getting into board games for all these years now and seeing so many specifically two-player games and how clever, thematic they can be, the Duke is one that, because it's so much like the older style games, that I really don't get to anymore or play anymore. And so, yeah, that's my other main con. Do you have anything else, John?
No, I mean, I think it's just, as you were saying, it's very abstract. So if you're looking or expecting for something with lots of other kind of specialized rules or like the ways of how it ties into anything, so that's where it's like from the artwork standpoint, it can be a little misleading, because then we were talking about this before too. It's like the artwork looks really intense for the new version.
Yeah, the new
now.
version that it's called the Duke Lord's Legacy, which is the version that you guys can maybe find now if you're interested in the game. And I'll even put up a picture of it while John's talking right now.
But basically, if you're looking at it, it actually kind of has the sense of like, ooh, it looks like if you're like Game of Thronesy feeling, or like Dungeons and Dragons high fantasy of like, oh, who's this Duke and like, what am I fighting against, or what am I going to be doing? And then you open the box and it's just a bunch of wooden pieces.
Yeah.
That might be a little bit of a, what did I just buy? Why does this cost so much for me to buy? Because I think the retail price is $40 for the game. That being said, as we mentioned before, I don't necessarily think it's a waste of money. I actually think this is a really good game in that sense. But once again, just it is abstract. So it's very much like buying a chess set or buying a checker set. You don't buy chess sets and like, oh my gosh, it's like Lord of the Rings themed. And it's like super cool in that way when it's literally just chess, right? Kind of like that. So I think that's the one thing also that I would just definitely emphasize. This is very much if you're interested in trying a different take on abstract games, definitely go for it. If you're looking for other things in your board games, you might want to look somewhere else.
Yeah, and so as you can see, the picture I put up is what you actually get when you open the game.
That is the game. Literally, that is the game.
Yeah.
It'll just be more pieces over time, but that is the game.
Yeah, with each player's bags and extra pieces, and retail price being $40 as you mentioned. And so yeah, it's kind of, if you're interested in this kind of game, right, as John said. And so if you are interested in the game, I will include a Amazon affiliate link in this review, because I think it is still something that, if you're interested, it's worth checking out. And if you use that link to purchase the game, it'll not cost you more, but Amazon will kind of basically give a percent of the payment to help support us. And so the other thing I did want to mention before we finish was that with our pros and cons, that's how we came to our ratings, as mentioned in the summary video, of a 6.5 for me and a
7.
From John. But then aside from that, there is a spin-off game that also came out, I think, a few years after the Duke, originally in 2013, called The Jarl, which was basically a Norse or Viking retheming. Yeah, not Norse, that's mythology, right? Just Viking retheming of the Duke with new pieces, with its own actions. And then I think the tiles were done in a kind of a weightier plastic, so it felt kind of, in a sense, like marble-ish or stone-ish, I think is what it was going for. And so those felt nice. But yeah, new pieces. So they had different actions, mainly focused on the defense action to prevent pieces from being taken. And themed specifically not after just Vikings, but The Vikings, the TV show that was out years ago. And so I used to have that one too. And I think the main thing with that one was that people would complain about how focusing on defense made the game feel much slower. So I think that's more definitely, if you like the Duke, I think you'd have to like the Duke first to maybe like the Jarl, because the other thing with getting the Jarl and the Duke is you could have one person play as like with the Jarl pieces and one person play with the Duke pieces, so kind of mixing it up that way. If you're curious in that, if you get to that point. But of course, for sure, try out the Duke if that's what you're interested in first. And so with that, that has been our detailed review of the Duke. And so if you found this video interesting, helpful, hope you'll share it with people you play board games with, friends and family. Hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel and following us on Instagram at I Got Board Game. And until next time, we'll see you then. Bye.